Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to one of our live streams. We are so excited. We have representatives again from Fort Hood's DPW Natural Resources Group. They're always a lot of fun. And this time we have butterflies. Like, who loves butterflies? Everybody. We have with us today Miss Chelsea Plimpton. Hi. And she is the Fort Hood lead pollinator biologist at Fort Hood, and it's a very long title, Adaptive and Integrative Management Team. And she's part of Fort Hood's DPW Natural Resources. So welcome. We're,
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
yeah, well, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. 1 second. Perfect. And let's play the presentation. So welcome everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about pollinators and monarch butterfly tagging on Fort Hood. And we are going to jump into the presentation outline. So you're going to be introduced to the Fort Hood AIM team structure, and then we will talk about the pollination process and what a pollinator is. From there, we will go further into detail about the butterfly species and the tagging project that I conduct on Fort Hood, as well as discuss a few of the citizen science projects that the AIM team participates in. And we will wrap up the presentation with some of the things that you can do to support pollinators. Okay, so the Adaptive and Integrative Management, or AIM team, mainly focuses on the proactive management of mission-sensitive species. And these are species that, if they were to be listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act, could restrict or limit military training and readiness. And we have a small team, but a small but powerful team. So in the image on the top right, you can see from left to right, my husband, Charlie Plimpton, who I co-lead the AIM team with. He is the lead avian biologist. And then on the right, we have Brad Burden, who is our full-time field biologist, and he helps us assist with collecting data and analyzing information. We are all employees of the University of Illinois, so the university has a CSU, or Cooperative Ecosystem Studies Unit agreement with the US Army. So we are considered civilian contractors. Now, the AIM team program was successfully implemented in 2015 using a four-pronged approach. We conduct a lot of outreach events throughout the year. We also make an effort to develop relationships with a lot of different partners that have similar missions with conservation. And along with developing partnerships, we conduct research both with citizen science that our partnerships kind of develop and have. And then we also conduct our own research with goals of publishing for the Fort Hood team. And with research, we always have to be mindful of data management, organizing, and making sure that information is written down accurately. So our team mainly focuses on grassland habitats and species that utilize grassland habitats. So we collect a lot of data on different species using the same points and transects throughout the installation. And I have an image on the left of the boundary of the installation. All of the green dots that you see are points that we have gone out to and surveyed and collected data at. So some of the current and past information or projects that we have collected and done research on include declining avian species, setting out pollinator traps, monarch tagging, conducting vegetation surveys, and milkweed stem counts. So let's get into what the process of pollination is and how it works. I have included an image here on the left for you to kind of follow along step by step with me as I describe what's going on. So with step one, we see a cute little pollinator approaching a flowering plant. And bumblebees collect pollen grains as well as looking for nectar to consume. So as the bee is searching through the flower looking for nectar, it's picking up pollen grains from the male part of the plant, and the top part that has the grains on it is called the anther. And so once it's done with this individual flowering plant, it will fly over to another individual of the same species. And in order to pollinate the flower, the bee needs to deposit the pollen grain on the female part of the plant called the stigma. And that pollen grain will travel down into the ovary of the plant, which for some species is located at the base of the flower, and it will the seed will then develop and grow at that location. So here we have some examples of how seeds disperse or travel to different areas. The first you might recognize, it's a wind dispersal. Examples would be milkweed seeds or dandelion seeds. And they have these little white tufts on them that the wind are able to pick up and carry pretty far away. Water plants, a lot of wetland species, their seeds will be deposited down into the water, and depending on which or what kind of body of water it is, streams, ponds, lakes, the current can transport it to different areas of that body of water. Now, explosive dispersal happens when you have a plant species with a seed pod that's very sensitive to whether the wind blows and it hits it just right, or if an animal or a human being was to touch it, it bursts open and sends the seeds out in all these different directions. So that's a really fun dispersal method. And last, we have animals. So there are a couple different ways that animals disperse seeds. You may have seen squirrels collecting acorns and stashing them for the winter. Well, sometimes squirrels forget where they've stashed their acorns. And with the right growing conditions, you can have an entirely new oak tree develop and grow in those areas. There are some plants that require animals to consume the seeds and go through the digestive system. So for example, we see a bird here consuming a berry on a plant. That bird will have the seed going through its digestive system, and as it's flying around, going to different locations looking for more seeds to eat, it will deposit the seeds in its scat. And so that's how that type of plant species is able to disperse their seeds. Lastly, we have an example of sticky or seeds that have spurs or sharp points on them. They can easily be attached to fur or a human's shoes. This is a picture of after I walked through a grassland with a lot of spear grass present, and that was seeding out. I got back to my truck and I noticed I had all of these different seeds sticking to my shoes. And so I spent a good 5-10 minutes picking off as much as I can, but I was actually the one that moved and helped disperse this particular seed species from within the grassland to potentially 300-400 meters outside. So now that we know about the pollinator process, what is a pollinator? So I have a few examples here of some of the different pollinators that you might see in your native backyard areas, or if you're traveling to different areas of Texas. For example, bats, nectar-eating bats, which are typically found in South Texas, like the Big Bend area, areas that have the cactuses with the big, beautiful blooming flowers. This type of pollinator is going to be consuming nectar and spreading pollen in the nocturnal or nighttime hours. We also have flies, beetles, of course, bumblebees, hummingbirds, butterflies, which most people know butterflies, recognize butterflies, and moths. I think a lot of people don't realize that wasps are also a vital pollinator, and they are a predatory insect, so they are going after some of the other insects in your gardens, but While we don't necessarily like them or want to spend a lot of time around them, they are really important for the pollination process. So flower shapes do matter when it comes to the pollination process. And here I have a term, pollinator syndrome, which is simply flowers have the ability to evolve a combination of characteristics or traits that influence which specific pollinators are going to be visiting. And these traits can include flower shape or color, the presence of a scent or odor, and nectar guides, which nectar guides are a UV, um, they're a marking that's the plant provides that is under ultraviolet light, and some insects have the ability to see in ultraviolet light, like certain bee species. And so these plants are providing little runway strips for these particular insects to guide them straight to the area where they need to pollinate. And so some of the examples of native plants that we have in this area are on the left, lace cactus, which produce these large, beautiful bowl-shaped flowers, which will attract a lot of beetle species. In the center, we have trumpet vine, which has a large funnel shape or cup shape flower. And mostly you're going to be seeing hummingbirds utilizing these types of flowers, but you may occasionally find a bumblebee or two trying to get inside of the flower. And cowpen daisy on the right is actually in the sunflower family. And bees and butterflies are attracted to their tubular shaped flowers, and they have these wide landing platforms that's easy for those two pollinators to land and consume nectar. Now, while some of you know that hummingbirds are a nectar-eating bird species, there are a few other birds that will stop and consume nectar as well. And this is a photo from our own backyard in Salado of a few orchard orioles who stopped by to grab some nectar out of our Flamacanthus shrub. And so on the right, you can see we have an adult female oriole. Males and females are sexually dimorphic, which means that they look different. The two of them look different on their colorations. On the top left, you have a male orchard oriole, and the bottom left is a juvenile male orchard oriole. All right, so monarch butterflies. So this is a pretty iconic species. A lot of people around the world can recognize the orange and black coloration of the monarch butterfly, as well as the large yellow, black, and white stripes of the caterpillar. And this is a species that, while you can see it worldwide, it's known in North America for its long migratory journeys. And so I've included a map here from Monarch Watch that shows the spring migration, the summer overwintering grounds, and the fall migration. And I have also placed a little icon where Fort Hood sits on the migratory pathway. So you can see that Fort Hood is a really important stopover site for migrating monarchs both in spring and in the fall months. Okay, so monarchs are considered a flagship species for grassland and other pollinator conservation efforts. And so what is a flagship species? Well, this means that monarchs are a well-known and a more likable species, which draws in people's interest. Think of polar bears, tigers, and pandas. A lot of people know them, a lot of people are interested, they find them cute. And the iconic monarch butterfly has also developed, a lot of people have developed connections with them, whether it's cultural, spiritual, or personally. I think many of us have raised monarch butterflies from caterpillars and observed their metamorphosis and released them in kindergarten, sometimes earlier. And we as a species in this country have developed a great connection to this migratory insect. Also, promoting habitat restoration for monarchs also benefits other vulnerable wildlife species that share the same habitat, but people might not I don't know, they're not as likable. People are kind of, a little bit more hesitant and they don't really want to get involved. And I have an example on the next slide here. So monarchs open the door for supporting other species, like I said, that aren't as cute and likable. One example are bats. And we have an image of Mexican free-tailed bats that was taken out of Round Rock. And habitat loss is a key issue for a lot of species, including monarch population. They also are impacted by a lot of other things like weather, insecticides, but habitat loss is a huge key issue with a variety of different pollinators. So by creating pollinator-friendly habitat, we can attract moths and beetles and other food sources that could be consumed by insect-eating bats. And so we're kind of benefiting both the species that we find adorable and we really like and have a connection, and the other species that we kind of are a little hesitant to like. And the monarch conservation supports all wildlife, not just the monarch butterfly, which is a plus. We love that. So now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the things we've been seeing in the news the last couple of months about the IUCN and their decision to label the monarch butterfly as endangered and what that means. So here I have a comparison between two organizations, two agencies, the IUCN and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're going to kind of go through the bullets of what each organization and entity is and how it impacts the listing or the labeling of monarchs. So the International Union for Conservation of Nature is an international organization working to influence societies and governments to help conserve natural areas. This is not the same as listing. So this IUCN designation that they announced is not the same as listing under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. It doesn't provide any protections or regulatory authority. Unlike the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Endangered Species Act was launched in 1973, and it's a law that provides federal protections for vulnerable wildlife. Monarchs are not listed currently as a federal endangered species. They are a candidate species, but there are no federal protections for monarch butterflies. However, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to have a final ruling decision on whether or not monarchs should be listed as endangered under the ESA. I believe it's the end of the year in 2024. Okay, so let's jump into citizen science work. And so what is citizen science? There are a lot of organizations that are utilizing volunteers to assist with collecting scientific data. And I'm going to be talking about a few of the organizations that the AIM team has been participating in helping to collect data in the next couple of slides. First, we have one of our partner organizations, Monarch Joint Venture, which is an organization that partners with federal, state, and non-government organizations, universities, businesses to protect monarch migration. And so we have been partnered with them since 2019. Some of the programs that they offer includes research, guidance with habitat management, conservation techniques, monarch education and outreach, as well as creating this list or this group of other partnership organizations that have a similar mission or goal for conserving monarch butterflies and helping with other conservation efforts. So one of the citizen science programs that the AIM team participates in is the Integrative Monarch Monitoring Program, also known as IMMP. And this is a national program that monitors monarch health and habitat quality. There's some of the field activities that are available for this citizen science project include milkweed and blooming plant surveys, monarch egg and larva surveys, as well as adult monarch counts, and tracking parasitism and monarch survival. And we have utilized a couple of these activities, and I'm hoping in the next couple of seasons, maybe next spring, that I'm going to start expanding and including all of the activities and some other things that Monarch Joint Venture is involved in. Okay. They have a wonderful collection of resources on their website, which are free to download and print. The general public can go on there and search them themselves. Some of the topics that they have available are educational outreach, information for students of varying ages, habitat management guides, as well as plant guides based on different regions of the country, agricultural management practices, as well as milkweed and nectar plants based on which region you are. You can look up which plants are native and what you should be planting in your gardens. Other educational pamphlets are available to print out and pass out at events. If you have an event, that would be super helpful. And you can access the list of partner organizations to see if there are other groups or organizations in your area that you could access if you had if you were looking for help with developing a garden, or if you have a ranch and you need to manage it for pollinators and agricultural services. So they have a lot of great resources, and I invite you to go and check out some of the things that they have available. So another organization we have been participating with for several years, since 2017, is Monarch Watch, and it is a nonprofit educational conservation research program. It's been around since 1992 and was founded by Dr. Chip Taylor out of the University of Kansas. And so this program mainly focuses on the monarch butterfly, their habitat, and the fall migration. So anybody in the general public can go on the Monarch Watch website and order a tagging kit. The kits come with monarch butterfly tags, as well as a paper data sheet, tagging instructions, and usually they include a little packet or a piece of paper that details population trends from the last year and some other information, how to properly tag butterflies. So it's a great little kit they've put together. And again, you can order that on their website at monarchwatch.org. They have an online shop, and you can just check out all the really cool things that they have available as well. Okay, so after you have ordered the kit, you've collected your data, Monarch Watch requests that you submit data for the tag code, gender, and location of all the monarchs that you tagged, as well as the participant's name and contact information. And you can upload that data straight to monarchwatch.org. They prefer an Excel spreadsheet that is uploaded to their website, but I think they are able to accept mail-ins. You can easily go to their website. I have a screenshot here at the bottom left-hand side of the page where you can see a link to submit your tagging data, which is going to redirect you to another page, and they have a real detailed explanation of how to upload your spreadsheet of data. And let's see, the total number of monarchs that I have submitted data for between the years of 2017 and 2020 is 9,807. And after this year's tagging project, which typically goes between September and November, I will have over 10,000 monarchs tagged from Fort Hood. So that's really exciting. That's a really big number. Additionally, I am also a master's student through my employer, and I decided to do my master's project on the monarch butterfly health and condition as they're coming through the installation. So some of the other data that I collect throughout the tagging project includes weight, gender, forewing and hindwing measurements, wing condition, OE parasite sampling, and vegetation sampling. So how do we identify the gender of a monarch butterfly? Well, males have these small black glands on the insides of their hind wings. Females do not have glands. Females also have thicker veins on their wings compared to male monarchs. And if you were to look really closely at the abdomens of the butterflies, at the tips of the abdomens, the male has these claspers, that are used during the reproductive process where they're able to hold on to the female, and females don't have these claspers. So that's another way, if you had them in the hand and you were looking at them, you could ID gender. So how do we measure forewings and hindwings? I have color coded on the left the different measurements that I do. In red is the forewing measurement, and I am measuring from a particular white spot at the base of the forewing and measuring straight to the tip or the apex of the hindwing, or the apex of the forewing. For the hindwing, that's color coded in blue, I am measuring from the white spot that is at the base of the mitten-shaped discal cell that is found in the middle of the hindwing, straight through to the tip or the apex of the hindwing. And in order to make these, or to do these measurements, we have to restrain the monarchs in a special glycine envelope, and that way they're not moving around and I'm able to make an accurate measurement. For scoring wing condition and wing damage, I am observing the wings for missing patches of scales, whether small or large patches, and I have a scoring system where categorically I'm able to figure out how many, based off of the number, how many patches of scales or how large the patches are, and like put them in a specific category. For scoring wing damage, I'm observing each individual wing and counting up the number of rips, punctures, or tears. And then again, I have another scale where I can categorically put them in a specific group based on how many they're missing or how many rips and tears are on the wings. Okay, OE sampling. So OE, also known by the scientific name Ophriocistus electroscura, is a parasite that has evolved with monarch butterflies and their cousins, queen butterflies, which we both see here in Texas. OE was first discovered in Florida in the 1960s, and it is a parasitic protozoan, which is a single-celled organism. It's kind of between a plant and an animal, and it needs a host to survive. So this parasitic relationship between OE and monarchs definitely benefits the parasite and doesn't benefit the host. OE spores are microscopic. You need a microscope to observe them. They are brown and football shaped, and you can see I've placed an image that I've taken from my microscope off to the bottom right of the screen. The spores have a life cycle, and so I'm going to kind of go into detail a little bit about their life cycle. The brown football shapes are spores, but inside the spores there are parasites. So the dormant spores are found on the outside of the body. Once a caterpillar consumes those spores, they activate, and caterpillars have 5 growing stages before they go into the pupa or chrysalis stage. So as they're growing and developing through these 5 molting stages, the spores are sitting in their gut and intestinal tracts and going through the intestinal lining. Once the caterpillars go into the pupa or chrysalis stage, the parasites will replicate, and then before the adult butterfly emerges, these spores will then go back into that football shape, and then they'll migrate and be found on the outside of the body, and then they're considered dormant again. How do we tag monarchs? This is one of the biggest questions I think I am asked every year, is how do you physically tag them? And so I have a couple images here showing that process. So you can see on the left the tag sheet, which has all of the little tags. They're very similar to if you're at the grocery store and you see a tag on a piece of fruit. They're about that size. They're quite small, and on the tag, the information that is placed is a Monarch Watch email. Each individual butterfly also gets a series of numbers and letters to be able to identify each individual. And the best way to take this tag off of the sheet is to use a toothpick to kind of peel it up so that you don't have too much of your finger covering the adhesive. You want it to be able to stick to the wing. And we'll be placing the tag on the middle of that mitten-shaped discal cell I was discussing earlier. It's going to be placed right in the middle, and you'll just hold it down and roll the toothpick off and make sure you put a little pressure so that you know the adhesive has attached to the wing really well. So I'm going to give you a little sneak peek as to a little bit of the statistical analysis that I have done for last year. My graduate project consists of 2 field seasons, so I still have this year's data to do, but I wanted to kind of show you some of the cool things that I found from last year's tagging project. So here I have a graph showing the daily number of captured monarch butterflies per week on Fort Hood. And just as a reminder, or in case you don't know, the peak migration for our area is typically the first 2 weeks in October. So last year I found it really interesting that we had kind of a big push of monarchs coming through that last week in October instead of seeing it the first couple of weeks. So I found that really interesting. And I mean that could be from a couple of different things. I feel like this could be a question someone's going to ask at the very end. So I mean, weather influences their migratory patterns, food availability. There are a few other things. So I could theorize why we had a big like push of monarchs, but I don't actually know the cause and why it did that. So with the vegetation sampling that I've conducted, I am looking at the blooming plant species that monarchs are using during capture. So these are plants that they're actively feeding on while we're using the net to scoop them up and capture them to collect data. So here we have the total percentage of the monarchs and what's blooming species that they're using. So at the top of the list with 53%, we have Liatris, or also known as gayfeather, which was the top blooming plant species that monarchs were using during capture for 2021. Frostweed was second with 37%, and toothleaf goldeneye was third with 4%. And I've included the pictures of plants at the bottom of the screen so you kind of have an idea of what these plants look like. Liatris is on the left. It's a really pretty plant. Every year I feel like this is definitely in the top 3 when we capture monarchs feeding. In the center we have frostweed, and on the right we have toothleaf goldeneye. So I'm going to be using a little bit of terminology that might be confusing for some people. So I wanted to kind of explain a couple of terms for you so you know in later slides what I'm talking about. So a native species is one that has originated and evolved to survive the habitat that it's currently occupying. A non-native species is one that's been introduced and is originally from somewhere other than its current habitat. This could be plants or animals that are from other countries, continents. The word invasive is a species that outcompetes other species, which may harm the ecosystem. Now, both native and non-native plants, animals can be considered invasive. And I have a few examples up at the top of the slide to help give you an idea. On the left, we have the white prickly poppy, which is one of my favorite native plants. In the center, we have crepe myrtle, and it is a non-native plant originating in China and Korea. And this is a really popular small tree or flowering tree that a lot of people have in their backyards or their residences, as well as outside of businesses. And for the native and invasive example, we have Persian purple passion vine, which in the right growing conditions This plant can definitely get out of hand in your gardens and completely take over. So they definitely will do okay in shade. That full sun though is going to really kind of get them to spread and pop up, and you'll start seeing shoots everywhere in your garden. So back to monarchs, we have their host plants. And a host plant, this is the plant that they're going to be feeding on as juveniles. And monarchs are only going to be feeding on milkweed plants. Here I have three examples of native Central Texas milkweeds that would be a great addition to your yards or businesses, or, in school if you have a school garden. We have antelope horns, a green milkweed, and zyzotes or zyzotes milkweed. Now, I want to talk a little bit about tropical milkweed because I always tend to try to fit this into conversation somewhere. I'm pretty passionate about this topic, or I've become pretty passionate about it. A lot of us have seen this plant in big name box stores or small nurseries, and it's actually a non-native plant. It originates in Central America in Mexico, and the biggest problem with this non-native milkweed is that in temperate areas where you have warmer winters, the plant doesn't die back. It can bloom throughout the year. And this can cause a buildup of the OE parasite as monarchs are visiting, and they are really attracted to them. Infected monarchs can leave spores behind. The plant not only produces nectar for monarchs, but the leaves are a food source for the caterpillars as well. And so the monarch caterpillars can be exposed to dangerous levels of OE. And this can negatively impact their reproduction and migration. OE, high infections of OE can cause problems with monarchs trying to emerge from their chrysalises. Also, it could reduce energy levels. So, monarchs could potentially be doing a 3,000-mile migration from, say, Toronto, Canada to central Mexico. And if they have a high OE load, they're not able to have the energy to completely make the migration. And I was talking with Cindy earlier before the presentation, and she mentioned she had some milkweed plants in her yard, and if that's a problem. If you know that these plants are going to die back on their own, then that's great. Just make sure you manage it. But if you're in areas of the country where it's a really warm winter and they're going to bloom throughout that winter, you really want to be able to just cut them back at the base, and it's going to be something where you're managing. And then I also recommend just not purchasing them at all. Support native plants instead. And so, of course, I have an example here of what you may see from a big name box store, which I'm not going to mention. I have blurred out the name of the store and the grower information as well. I really just wanted you to see some examples of what you could see, not only in the big stores, but also small nurseries as well that have native plants. Sometimes non-natives, get mixed in with them and they're mislabeled. So the image on the left, the first thing I noticed when I arrived at the store was the name of the plant. It says butterfly weed, which, if you don't know, butterfly weed is a common name for a native weed that we have here, a native milkweed. I put an image on the bottom right of the screen. And so below the common name, you see the beginning of a scientific name. And a scientific name is made up of two words. You have the genus and the species. Here on this label below the common name where it says butterfly weed, you only see the genus, so you don't see the full scientific name. And many milkweed species that we have that are native also are in the genus Asclepius, which is on the label. So it's a little confusing to not have the actual species listed. The next thing that I noticed was there was an image, which a lot of labels don't have an image of the plant that they're advertising. And so you can compare the butterfly weed image that I have on the screen that I've included and the image on the label, and they look pretty similar. I would say they're pretty similar, and that is what they're advertising. They're advertising butterfly weed, which is the native variety. Unfortunately, the tropical milkweed photo that I've placed on the screen was the flower that was actually in this pot that was being sold at the store. And it's a little concerning. But another interesting thing that I noticed that I've never seen before on a pot, at the very bottom of the label, there is another label included that reads, "Please note, wait 2 weeks prior to exposure to caterpillars and heavily prune milkweed stems 6 to 10 inches by October 31st." And there's a clear monarch image on the label. And so this kind of leads me to believe that the company or the grower knows that they're supplying tropical non-native tropical milkweed. They are aware of the problems that could happen, and that's why they say prune this plant at this time to make sure that they're making people assume that the OE is going to be a problem, or their people aren't aware, but they know that OE could be a problem, and yet they're advertising it as a native. So I was really I don't want to say frustrated, but it was really interesting to see this label on here and debating whether or not I should contact the grower company about it. And I typically do with small native nurseries, and I'm probably going to go back and tell them about it. But it's really important to know if you are going out and purchasing milkweeds from a small nursery or a large store, to know what plant that you are purchasing. So even if you have to, on your smartphones, look it up, make sure you know scientific names, have an image of the flower that you're purchasing or the plant that you're purchasing. I mean, if you want to, you can also write up or you can like put some notes on a Word document and print that out and bring it with you. Just have that information, that knowledge before you go out and make a purchase, because you can run into situations where plants that are labeled native are not native. Okay, let's talk about a few other citizen science programs that the public can get involved with. Journey North is a great organization that helps track wildlife. You are submitting your sightings of monarch butterflies, and well, by submitting those sightings, you're helping biologists use that data for research. So this is one of the top organizations that I use when I am ready to go out into the field and do some monarch butterfly research. I log on to their website and I look at everybody's sightings and to see where that leading line of monarchs are located, and that kind of gives me a general idea of when I should go out. This organization also has some other really cool topics to be involved in. And you can see on the right here, I've included some things from their website. Hummingbirds, you have bald eagles and frogs, and tracking leaf out. And it's just a really great organization. And they rely on the general public to provide the data in order to see what's going on and see what things are doing. They also have another great program that is currently open for registration. This would be great for teachers, homeschoolers, nature centers, youth groups, and classrooms. They have been doing this program for about 27 years, and it is the Symbolic Monarch Migration Project. Their goal for this year is to have 2,000 participants, and I believe they're currently at 150. So there's plenty of room and space for people to register, and this allows students and schools throughout the nation to connect with other countries, and you are creating this connection and you're creating this symbolic migration through printing out and decorating little paper monarch butterflies, and they're traveling to Mexico to schools and students that are living there. So it's a really great organization. It's a really great program, and I definitely recommend, if you are a teacher or you have a nature center or work with students, that this is something that you consider doing and putting into your routine. Okay, so another citizen science program that is open to the public that I am looking forward to doing next spring is the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And this is a joint project between MJV, which we talked about earlier, and the Wisconsin-Madison Arboretum. Their goal is to use the public's help to track monarch eggs, larvae, and milkweed nationwide. So with us being a partner with MJV, this is another citizen science project that I'm really interested in conducting, and hopefully next spring I'll be able to put it into our project lineup. Okay. iNaturalist is a really fun nature app. You can also access it through a website as well. It helps you not only ID plants and animals, but you can record your observations and you're supporting scientists that are working towards protecting nature. So I've included my own account, which it doesn't have a lot of species on it. I've been kind of busy, but you can see that you go on, you create an account, and it's really great to be able to, if you go on a hike or a walk and you see some pollinators or you see birds, deer, you can report the animals that you're observing, put in a little bit of information, and this information is being used directly by, a lot of scientists and biologists in the community. Okay, so let's talk about a few things that you can do to help pollinators. Number one, plant a diverse collection of native host and nectar plants. So you want to be putting enough, or you want to be feeding both juvenile and adult pollinators. So you want to be including plants that can do both. Using a combination of grasses, blooming plants, shrubs, and trees, you are providing a diverse selection of host plants and nectar sources for a variety of different pollinator insects, birds. It's just providing a lot of great resources for them. I would suggest that your goal is to make sure that you have a couple of blooming plants, one to three blooming plants for each season. So spring, summer, fall, winter, you're going to be seeing a couple of flowers blooming in your garden. And so let's talk a little bit about cultivated varieties versus wild native plants. This is another topic that can be similar to the monarch, the tropical milkweed. If you're at a small nursery or a big name box store, you might run into a few plants that have labels that show a cultivar name. So let's learn a little bit about cultivars. Cultivars are plants that was specifically bred by humans to show certain traits or characteristics. So for example, maybe the flowers bloom longer. The flower colors could be different. You might have different varieties that you wouldn't necessarily see in nature. Some of the problems with cultivars include the crossbreeding with native plants. So if you include cultivars and native plants in your gardens, they could crossbreed, and this could negatively impact the native population in the surrounding area. Also, modifying the genetics of natives could potentially impact the plant's ability to produce nectar, which means that there's less food for pollinators. And the image that I have on the screen here, I put a red arrow to show you that typically, and this is not always the case, but if you're in a store and you're looking at the plant label, you can see Echinacea is the genus, which is the same as the wild variety. But next to it in quotes, you have Cheyenne Spirit, and that indicates that this particular plant is a cultivar. So I like to include a personal experience with cultivars that happened relatively recently within our Fort Hood pollinator garden. We purchased a couple of aromatic aster plants, which are gorgeous plants that bloom in the fall, and monarchs really are attracted to them. So we unfortunately purchased cultivars unknowingly. We had no clue. We thought that they were native, and we noticed that monarchs and bees did not go to the cultivar plant. We had wild varieties that we collected the seeds from some of the training areas on Fort Hood, and we germinated them and planted them relatively close to the cultivars in our garden. We noticed that bees, monarchs, other insects were only going to the wild. I have a couple of pictures of the plants from our garden below. The cultivar is on the left. That is the genetically altered plant. The wild variety, which was not genetically altered by humans, is on the right. You can definitely tell there is a pretty big difference between the two. The first thing that I notice is the beautiful compact blooms on the cultivar variety. This plant is also relatively close to the ground. It's a low mounding plant. It doesn't get as tall as the wild variety, which is quite tall. I want to say it's 5-6 feet. So that is the biggest difference. And you can see that the wild variety on the right, the blooms are definitely not close together. They're spread out on the stems. So I hypothesized that the reason why the monarchs and bees and other pollinators were not going to the cultivar was because the cultivar did not produce enough nectar. It was genetically altered. And one of the traits that was altered was the amount of nectar that it was able to produce. So I'd like to include a couple of native plants that you could add to your gardens or consider adding to your gardens. And here are the herbaceous or low growing flowering plants that you could research and think about adding. We have purple coneflower, all of the native milkweeds that I talked about earlier, aromatic aster, prairie verbena, gay feather, which was the #1 flowering plant for monarchs when we captured them feeding last year, and frog fruit, which is a great flower for a lot of bees, like bees and small butterflies will go to frog fruit, which is typically on the ground and it kind of spreads out on the ground. Again, make sure you research your habitat type. What kind of area are these plants going to be placed and planted in? Check out this type of soil that you have, light requirements. Some plants require full shade or dappled shade. Some require 6 to 8 hours of full sun. So make sure you do a little bit of research and you know specifically what plants you want to purchase before you venture out to your native nursery or local nursery. And then also in the back of your mind, just think about the cultivars and all the information that I supplied about all the things that cultivars could impact. Here we have a list of native woody species, and these are going to be larger, medium to large shrubs or small trees, but also great for a lot of pollinators, provide a lot of nectar. Common buttonbush, Mexican plum, flame acanthus, agarita, Texas kidneywood, Texas lantana, and Texas mountain laurel. So again, I'd like to just remind you that check out your habitat where these plants are going to be planted, what soil type is there, what soil do the plants need, and the light requirements. And if you're interested in purchasing seeds online, our team has used Native American Seed Company, which they specialize in native wildflower and grass seeds. You can also purchase pre-made seed mixes as well. They will, they mainly focus on the areas within Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. So if you are watching and you're from, New England, I would suggest asking your local Master Naturalist chapter or Native Plant Society to see if they have any recommendations for you if you want to purchase quality seeds. Okay, and Monarch Watch, which we purchase our tags from every fall. They also have a program where schools and nonprofits, as well as individuals looking to do large restoration projects, can apply for free milkweed plugs. And the milkweeds that they'll be receiving are native to their area. And so if you are a school or a nonprofit looking to add milkweeds to a small pollinator garden, you can apply on monarchwatch.com And if you qualify, you can receive a free flat of 32 milkweed plugs, which is great. For the large restoration projects, Monarch Watch would like to focus on the states that are within the main migration routes, which encompass the eastern population and the western population over in California. However, if you're someone in a state that's kind of bordering the migratory flyways, you can try applying online and they will see if you qualify. We applied online for the large restoration project, I believe in 2018, and we were able to receive 1,200 milkweed plugs for our restoration site up at North Fort Hood. And it was a really great experience. We were able to get a team of volunteers in the area to come help us plant all of those plugs because we definitely couldn't do it with just a couple people. So this is also a great opportunity for the teachers, nonprofits, other large businesses that want to do a restoration project. Number two, provide a water source. So consider adding shallow dishes, which could be the ceramic saucers that you find at the store for your potted plants, or you can add bird baths to your backyard habitat. Just make sure that you clean the bird bath and the saucers frequently to prevent the spread of disease. But pollinators need access to water as well. And a good idea or a great tip is to put rocks into the saucers or your bird bath to kind of show birds what the depth of the water is, but also it gives bees a steady, familiar place to drink from. Now, there's a behavior that you might have seen before with male butterflies congregating around wet or moist areas. It's called mud puddling. And you may find them on the soil, sometimes on animal dung and decaying matter or roadkill. And the idea is that they are consuming vital nutrients that are not available in nectar in flowers. So nectar is mostly consists of sugar. So butterflies are also in need of salts and amino acids and other minerals. And if you are an individual that has agricultural pastures with livestock, you may also see this behavior in wet patches that have been urine soaked. So a great idea is to kind of designate an area in your yard that's going to be your, mud puddling area, and you can keep it damp to attract male butterflies. 3, provide shelter for hibernating pollinators. So in the cooler temperatures, insects are going to be looking for a warm place to hibernate for the winter. And so some shelter types are brush piles, leaves, the soil, dead flower stalks, and also logs and rocks. And I know it's really hard in the spring when the weather's starting to warm up and you're really excited about, getting in the garden and ripping stuff out and planting, but it's really important that you don't clean up your gardens too early. You really want to wait until the day and evening temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 weeks before you start really working in your gardens. So here I have a few examples of the shelter types and what kind of pollinators or insects you're going to find using them. On the top left, we have piles of leaves, and queen bumblebees, as well as fireflies and other butterfly and moth larvae or caterpillars, are going to be utilizing this shelter type to hibernate and stay warm in the winter. To the right, we have soil. Now, 70% of bees are ground nesting bees. And if you are interested or you're looking to do maybe a vegetable garden this winter and you need to till up the soil or really work in the soil, you should really make sure that you're looking to see if there are any ground nesting bees that are in the area. And you can even put a flag or some sort of marker to kind of remind you that, hey, there are bees, nesting here in the ground. Let's not disturb them. The bottom left, we have dead flower stalks. Now, these are typically used by cavity nesting bees. Green sweat bees are an example, but there are several other species that are going to be using the insides of the dead flower stalks to overwinter. And I know it's really tempting in the fall or the spring to pull up those flower stalks, but if you can, just leave them and let nature take its course. And the last example, logs and rocks. And some of you may be familiar with the woolly bear caterpillars. They utilize down logs and rotten logs and some other larger branches as their shelter of choice for the overwintering process. Beetles and other native pollinators also use these logs, down logs, snags, or rock piles. So it's a great idea to either designate an area of your yard as the overwintering pollinator area, or you can just leave branches, leaves, flower stems where they are. If you need to do a little bit of pruning, some perennial species do require to be pruned at the base. If you have to do some pruning and it's been pretty chilly consistently, I recommend that you place the flower stems or the logs in an area where the insects, pollinators can easily exit in the spring and make sure that they're not disturbed. 4, stop or limit your use of insecticides, pesticides, and herbicides. So these are chemicals that are not just impacting the species or insects that you deem a pest. They're also interacting with all of the other insects that are in the pollinator population. It's definitely something where, depending on the chemical that you're using, there's a half-life. There is, an amount of time that the chemicals are going to take to be removed from the plant. Also, chemicals can be absorbed up through the stems and the leaves and flowers, making their way to the nectar. So if you have, depending on the chemical that's being used, if you have a bee, a native bee that's going to a flower to get some nectar and collect the pollen to bring back to its nest, the chemicals can get into the nectar and negatively impact or harm that individual bee. And so it's a great idea to completely stop or seriously reduce the amount of chemicals that you're using in your natural habitats in your backyard. And a question that I get a lot is, what is a weed? And this was asked the other day to me, and so it's very interesting topic, and I wanted to kind of share with you just kind of the idea behind the word weed. And so a weed is an undesirable plant that's growing in an area humans don't want it to grow in. So an example is the Texas dandelion, which is not in the dandelion family, but it's a native plant, and many people in the area have labeled it a weed because they just don't like them popping up in their freshly mowed lawns. And really, it comes down to the individual with what they deem what a weed is to them. So many plants can be labeled a weed. It's just something that you don't like, and typically it's a native plant that is just growing out of place. But really, the definition, it comes down to, a plant that is not wanted. And a really important thing to remember, you're going out to your nurseries and you're really excited about this process. You've learned a lot of information, and you're researching your plants, you're purchasing them, you're planting them, you're bonding, you're creating this relationship and this bond with these native plants that you spent so much time researching. But a lot of people don't realize that you're purchasing and planting food for pollinators. So that means you're going to be seeing holes, you're going to be seeing leaf damage. And so when you're planning your native garden, you have to keep in mind that it's a good thing to see leaf damage. This is something that you want. An example in the photo is a monarch caterpillar. They can go through several milkweed leaves in a day. And so don't get discouraged, and don't forget that when you're planting a pollinator garden with all these native plants, you're providing food for not only the juvenile and the caterpillars and the juvenile insects, you are providing nectar sources for, butterflies, bees, hummingbirds. So just keep that in mind, that you want to see, insects eating your leaves and using your flowers. and 5. So the last topic I want to talk to you about, mowed lawns are considered a monoculture, and a monoculture means that there is just one species that is taking up this space. So in the image on the left, we have a backyard, and the one species is grass. It's not very diverse. You can see that there aren't any flowers for butterflies. There isn't a collection of or a variety of food resources, shelter, etc. So this does not benefit pollinators. On the right, this is actually an image from my own backyard in Salado. We have a very large live oak in our backyard, which shades the entire area. So it's very difficult to put in plants that require a lot of sun. So we've tried to make the effort to make it a shade garden. But you can see that it's very diverse. There's leaf piles and branches as overwintering shelter areas. We have some native flowering plants that flower at different times of the year that provide food resources. And then we also provide ceramic saucers and bird baths as water sources. So there are multiple native plant species available, and this is an example of a beneficial pollinator space. And if you are someone that doesn't have an oak that is completely taking over or shading out your backyard, um, it's still a great idea to provide leaf piles and branches and sticks. But again, you can kind of designate an area of your yard for that if you don't want the entire yard to look like mine. So a really important thing, I'd say the takeaway is that you have the power to help pollinators. Don't just sit here and think, well, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and all these large organizations are the people that are going to be helping, and they're going to be fixing this situation. It comes down to the individual population. It comes down to all of the individuals within nationwide within our country. If everyone was to designate an area as a pollinator friendly habitat, now this could be a larger yard, or you could have a ranch, but then it also includes people who maybe rent apartments and have balconies, and you could plant a couple of native plants or milkweeds in pots and just have them on your balconies. If we are able to do this, and everybody in the country is able to do this, we can add millions of acres of habitat for vulnerable species. Again, planting natives is just one thing that you can do. If you don't have the ability to plant a native garden, don't forget about all the other topics that I talked about in the earlier slides. Citizen science work, if you have a couple of hours, or that you're going to have a schedule where you can donate some hours for citizen science work. Just being able to educate the public and share this information that you're learning is also a really important thing that is going to impact pollinators. Again, reducing chemical use. If you use chemicals in your yard, on the edges of sidewalks and things, you can just cut down on your use. And of course, alter mowing. Maybe you have an area where that you and your children are actively using, and so you just mow that one area and leave the rest of your yard to be a native space. These are all great ideas that you can do, and you don't have to do everything that I mentioned, but you can kind of take one topic at a time and see what you can do. Now I have a couple of reference slides here, just images that I used, and the information. Here's our partnership page. These are all the organizations that we have been creating relationships with over the years. I've also included a couple of photos at the bottom from one of our recent outreach events where we had the Central Texas Master Naturalists, as well as Wild Birds Unlimited, the Temple store near the big HEB plaza where Kohl's and HEB. They came out and they were so generous. They helped us clean up trash and weed our trails and everything, and we were so grateful and happy that they were able to come out and help us. And so hopefully we were able to kind of further grow our relationship with those two organizations. And this is the last slide. So I'd like to thank everybody for your attention and following along. And I hope I was able to share a lot of cool information that you're going to kind of remember and, apply in your own lives. And I'd also like to invite you to follow the AIM Facebook page. It's at Fort Hood AIM Team. And we try to post a couple of times a week, just really fun, like facts, or if we find something really cool out in the field while we're conducting research, we'll post it. So, and sometimes we'll have outreach events that are open to the public. And so follow along and see what's, happening. And we'd be so happy to answer questions. And so, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if there are any questions, yeah, we can kind of jump to that.
Hey, Cindy, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am muted. And let me do it again. All right. So with the drought and all of a sudden we're having some rain, and it just seems like we're having late blooms and late plants that are starting to get big. Do you see this as a problem for the pollinators that, some of the things that had flowers, like my trumpet vines had flowers at this time, do not have flowers now, and they're just even thinking about growing. So is this going to be a problem?
Well, the drought impacting the blooms, our fall blooms, is concerning. There are a lot of other organizations, especially in the southern states, that have seen, and even the northern states are also experiencing a drought. And so it is a little concerning, specifically with monarch butterflies. A lot of my expertise is kind of with monarch butterflies, but I'm sure it applies to a lot of other pollinators as well. I have talked with a few organizations about just the status of blooming plants in the fall. And now that we've had a few rain events, I'm feeling more optimistic about our plants' ability to bloom and produce nectar for the migrating monarchs. I still think we're a little bit like a little ways away from monarchs arriving. I've heard a few people tell me that it might be delayed this year because of the drought, but hopefully with a little bit of a delay, the plants are able with the rain. And I think there is a few other chances of rain coming up as well. I think that it'll be I have a positive kind of, optimistic view about this fall with monarchs. So I think, it's just a part of the cycle, and it'll kind of work it'll be okay.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I like that. I like that. Well, let me ask you, I have another question.
Sure.
20 years ago,
Oh my
I saw the clean area, and they were just building, 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 knocking everything down. Trees weren't bigger than this. And now I see where people are starting to plant more gardens. The trees are getting bigger. Has this impacted from like y'all's research, or do you have any research from like 20 years ago? Are we doing better with encouraging the pollinators to come back, or are they really decreasing?
So I recently moved here. So 2017 was the first year that I arrived in Texas, and I've been here ever since. A lot of the research that we are currently doing on the AIM team doesn't have 20 years worth of data. It's relatively new. We're trying to establish projects that can eventually have 20 years of data. So with monarch tagging specifically, all of the information we're collecting, which has been a yearly thing, I have I've been planning for it to be something that is a permanent project. And so we will have at some point 20 years of data, but I think it hasn't been enough time to be able to look back to see, blooming plant trends, to look at the number of monarchs that are coming. I think we still need a little bit of time to be able to really fully analyze that. So maybe at like a 10-year mark, or you know just a few more years. We've done it since 2017, so a few more years.
And I have one more question that's kind of sort of not related to butterflies at all.
It's okay, go for it. I'll help you.
I have noticed that there's a rash of what I believe to be dung beetles in the area. They're green, they're big, and
Okay.
they like to roll stuff around.
Okay.
Is this a bad thing that we should be worried about?
The amount of dung beetles? That is a great question, and unfortunately, I am not an expert in dung beetles, so I can't give you, information that I won't be able to tell you anything about it. But that is really super interesting, and I would love to be able to look it up. And if I'm able to find an expert or someone that has that information, I'll definitely email you.
Yeah, because they were like, what are these big, horrible looking bugs that are flying around? And then I noticed they were rolling by the bird feeders, they were rolling stuff. And I went, these are probably dung beetles. And birds don't want to
Interesting.
eat them.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to definitely try to find someone either in, Fort Hood DPW, or I could contact a few other people, maybe some of our partner organizations that have a little information about that. I'm actually really curious about it too. So yeah.
Okay. Well, Alyssa, if they don't have any questions right now, I just want to thank you so much. I really truly enjoyed your presentation. I'm now completely anxiety ridden
No,
about everything
no,
that is in gardens now.
that's not what I was planning on. I just wanted to educate everybody about, don't go. I mean, if you want to, you can go out and start pulling, that would be great if you could start pulling all of your non-natives, but like, don't get stressed about it. This isn't something to be super stressed. Just take small little chunks and topics at a time, and over a gradual period of time, you can create something native, and that's going to be really great. I mean,
Yeah.
don't be stressed about it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
No,
do
no, it's
that.
okay. It's okay. But this is really interesting to see how, we unknowingly, unintentionally or believing like the different plant places and that we're doing things really good for the environment and we find out that we're probably hurting the environment, so
Just a
this is
matter of
this
educating yourself. It's knowledge. Knowledge is power. It really is. And so, it's researching, and a lot of people, they don't have a background in research. All of my school and education is researching to be a biologist, so I understand the process, but a lot of people, aren't strong in the STEM topics, or they aren't like, used to it, and they don't think about it. They're not being told in school that they should be focusing on this. And if we were to be able to incorporate this, early on in certain grades in school, then kids grow up with it. And it's important to protect and support our own native resources versus bringing in plants from Europe or Asia, which we don't know how they're interacting with all of these native pollinators that we have. They could be supplying not enough nectar, or they could have pests associated with them that our pollinators aren't used to or have evolved with. So it's just educating yourself and seeking out that information. And yeah, it's you can do it. I believe in you. It's a journey, but we all can do it. We can figure it out, and do a few extra things to really kind of support our native habitats.
well, and that's what's really important. That's why we've really loved having your entire department come and talk with us because people are always saying that yeah, we need to save the planet, but we don't know the details of saving
Right.
the planet. And so, learning about these different areas of what we can do it's just been such a gift from y'all's entire department. So we truly, truly appreciate you guys coming and doing these with us. So thank you so much for that. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing it. And before we go, I want to remind everybody that we continue to partner with their department. We have on Wednesday, September 21st, we're going to have stormwater and pollution. And then we have their archaeologists coming on October 5th. Prescribed burns, October 19th, and urban wildlife and Christmas bird count. So you guys are just bringing every form of everything for our environmental science, and we truly appreciate it. And I just want to say one other thing, guys. We have a couple more events that we've got coming up. We've recently added one for Constitution Day, and that is next week, September 12th, next Monday, with Dr. Anthony Jordan. And it's going to be the lesser known the amendments, the lesser known laws, constitutional laws. We always hear about the big ones. He's going to be talking about the smaller ones. Plus, we also have a little bit of military history, the use of GIS analysis in the Vietnam War. That's September 14th and September 15th. If you love to dance, then show up at the library at noon, and we're going to learn to dance, and we're going to do some fun stuff with it. So lots and lots of September activities. Again, thank you, your whole entire department. I know Chris is in here as well. Thank you so much for just sharing your expertise. It's exciting to see so many different research projects that are happening just across the highway from us, and we're very grateful for all the work that you guys do. So thank you again. Okay. All right. Well, thanks. And we will see you guys next week, next Monday. So y'all have a great day. Thanks again.
Thank
Melissa?
you.